If you're wondering about the future of New Orleans Saints wide receiver Michael Thomas, it turns out the team answered that question about a year ago. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode, we're going to go through a bunch of the biggest stories from around the New Orleans Saints this offseason, including the most recent contract restructure and what the salary cap looks like in 2025, the future of Marshon Lattimore, and first, the future of Michael Thomas, who we might already have an answer to anyway. We got all that on today's episode, and we appreciate you very much for being an everydayer here on the Locked On Saints podcast and for making us your first listen of the day every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, where you can make every moment more, because right now new customers will get $150 in bonus bets by simply winning any $5 bet. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. It's very likely that Michael Thomas will be a free agent when the new league year begins. In fact, it's kind of built into his contract. So there was a report that came out on Monday morning, that was saying that news breaking, blah, blah, blah. The Saints are expected to designate Michael Thomas as a post-June 1 cut. And I got tagged in it by a couple of people, things like that. And I caution around this time of year that people are taking old news and reframing it as new news and all these other things, or they're like kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall of highly likely things that then like build their credence. We've seen this particularly on Saints Twitter, actually, quite a bit. And so when we look over at a lot of different spots where, you know, how this could all work out, how the Michael Thomas thing goes, there's effectively two different possibilities here. The first possibility that keeps Michael Thomas in New Orleans is an extension before the first day of the league year. The other part of it is that it's already built into his contract that he's set to be designated as a post-June 1 cut on the first day of the league year. Let me read you what we can find here on Michael Thomas's contract from Over the Cap. The very last sentence of the blurb underneath his contract breakdown says that the contract contains what are 4 effective void years. So the reason why it says 4 effective void years is because there's only 3 official void years on his contract: 2025, 2026, 2027. So those don't start until next year. But 2024, this year's part of the deal, is expected to void automatically. So once that automatically voids, it then turns it into a 4th void year. So what does that mean? That means that, and I'll just continue reading from here, that the structure of the contract is designed to designate Thomas as a post-June 1 cut at the start of the new league year, or extend him prior to the start of the league year. So with the league year on its way here in just a couple of weeks, March 13th, the Saints would have to extend him or make the decision to extend him before then. I would be shocked, floored, appalled, not appalled, because I wouldn't be upset about it, right? I would just be flabbergasted, bamboozled around it if the New Orleans Saints did make that decision. It just doesn't feel like that's a direction that they're going. And it's always felt that way from the moment that the Saints gave him that super incentive heavy deal that included this very clause, the automatic designation as a post-June 1 cut when the new league year begins, portion of it a year ago. That's why I say we actually got this answer last year. Now, he made it through 10 games up to that Minnesota Vikings game, had the injury, and then never saw the field again for the rest of the 2023 season. Would he have seen the field had they gotten into the playoffs? We don't know. Dennis Allen seemed pretty clear that Marshon Lattimore could have been back on the field had they made the playoffs, but never really made that same type of, I'll call it a guesstimation, for only a guesstimation in that we never would get to see the actual end result because they didn't make the playoffs. And so we wouldn't have been able to actually find out if that were true. And so we didn't hear that about Michael Thomas, but we did hear it about Marshon Lattimore. You look at that. You look at the social media presence of Michael Thomas as of late, talking bad about the Saints organization, how nobody wants to coach with them and everything like that. Yet they managed to pull a top candidate at offensive coordinator. So take that for what you will. You also have, all the stuff that was going on around Derek Carr and everything, which, look, Derek Carr didn't have a strong start to the season. There's no doubt about that, right? So some of it is airing of grievances. Some of it is a little bit overboard, things like that. But whatever it is, it's going to be seen in a certain way by not only the New Orleans Saints organization, by the way, but NFL organizations as a whole. Like, oh, okay, well, that is a lashing out, that is an acting out, things like that. Like, those are the types of phrases that would be used to describe what Michael Thomas did, when really he was just like on Twitter getting his feelings off and everything. And that's what social media is, unfortunately. And so when I look at all of this in context, the fact that the Saints gave him an incentive-heavy deal last year, he earned none of those incentives in 2023. They were all not likely to be earned in the first place because of the injury that took place in 2022. So it's not super surprising that those incentives weren't earned, but you kind of expected maybe the yardage, one of the yardage incentives to be earned, maybe one of the completions or the receptions percentages to be earned, things like that. But after, dealing with that injury against Minnesota and not being able to get back out on the field, he wasn't able to earn any of those incentives. So you have that. The fact that he blamed the idea that he wasn't going to be able to get back out onto the field or didn't get back out on the field on the hospital ball from Derek Carr, paraphrasing what it was that he said, and things like that. That probably didn't go a long way with the organization either. Probably didn't go a long way with Derek Carr either. And so you have now a lack of production out on the field, an inability to stay on the field, and then popping off about the quarterback. Those are all things that, regardless of whatever validity Michael Thomas has in those conversations, and that amount of validity will vary person to person, who likes whom, who doesn't like who else. But depending upon, regardless of what level of validity any of that could have or is felt justified in certain situations and through certain particular viewpoints, none of it is going to be okay by the organization. Like, that's just the bottom line. And so between the contract structure as it was, between the things that were said on social media over the course of 2 or 3 different periods, because of the designation in the contract that already says that the contract is designed to make him a post-June 1 cut on the first day of the league year in 2024, there's not a lot to hang on and say, yeah, I think Michael Thomas is going to be back in 2024. Like, just looking at it realistically, it just doesn't look very likely that that's going to be the case. And that's some of the organizations doing with the structure of the deal. That's some of the organizations doing with their inability to keep him healthy. That's some of his doing with his inability to stay healthy as well. Like, both sides share in that. That's the way that I look at any injury situation across the NFL. If it's a recurring situation, or if there are recurring situations, that it's not only on the player, it's on the organization as well. So it's just time to part ways. I think it's going to be best for both the organization and for the player. It's a new system coming in here with Clint Kubiak anyway, and they can find the talent that they need at wide receiver. They have good talent at the wide receiver spot and all of those things as well, with Chris Olave, with A.T. Perry, with Rashid Shaheed, and now they get to completely rebuild that room. They'll be fine, but there's no replacing what a Michael Thomas could be. The issue is that what Michael Thomas could be isn't what he's turned out to be in the last 4 years or so. And it's all because of some random third down play that he probably didn't need to be on the field for in 2020 anyway, at the end of a game that was already put away in red zone territory when Latavius Murray dove and rolled over the back of his ankle. If he's not on the field for that play, we might be talking about Michael Thomas an entirely different way here 4 years later. But unfortunately, this is the way that it all played out, and it will very likely end with Michael Thomas no longer being a New Orleans Saint in 2024. Up next, let's get to your next biggest question, Marshon Lattimore. What's the future between the New Orleans Saints and their all-pro level cornerback? We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, but a Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let me ask you a question. If you had 1 hour extra in your day, how would you spend it? Would you spend it on something constructive? Would you spend it on relaxing? Would you spend it on recharging? Would you spend it working? I'd probably spend it working, if I'm being honest. But the best way to sort of figure out how you would squeeze the most out of the things that are most valuable with extra time in your life is actually trying therapy. And it's one of the things that BetterHelp has been incredible at for me is helping me figure out what matters to me and how to do more of it, and they can help you do the same. If you're thinking about trying therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule as well. You just fill out a brief questionnaire. You get matched with a licensed therapist that feels like a good match with your background, and you can even switch therapists at any time for no additional charge in case that pairing doesn't work out. You can learn more about what makes you happy today with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, family, we still don't know necessarily the future of New Orleans Saints cornerback Marshon Lattimore, but one thing's for sure, the rumors over the course of the next couple of weeks are definitely going to heat up. We appreciate you very much for being here for another episode of Locked On Saints. Don't forget, we are your team every day. So come back tomorrow as we go through our Combine preview, some of the players that I'm most looking forward to seeing during the NFL Combine while I'm there in Indianapolis. We're going to be breaking all of that down in tomorrow's episode. Do not miss out. All right. So the next big question that we're looking at beyond the future of Michael Thomas is the future of New Orleans Saints cornerback Marshon Lattimore. The Saints redid his contract, delayed a big portion of his base salary into a roster bonus that doesn't become guaranteed until a week before the season begins. And so what that does is effectively buys them a lot of time to get through free agency, the draft, potential trade value, potential trade talks, all of this other stuff all the way over the course of the offseason before making a decision or having to make a decision based on like a money deadline about whether or not he's going to be a New Orleans Saint or not be a New Orleans Saint. And so that is a tricky situation to try to navigate because everything that the Saints have done so far contractually says that they're interested in at least showing everybody else that they're open for business, that like the open sign's on, the lights are on, the door's open, there's somebody outside spinning a Marshon, get your Marshon sign here. Like all of that is happening. And while we can sit here and say, well, you know, look, the Saints might just be doing some fancy like cap manipulation stuff and everything. We know how the Saints go about doing their cap manipulation. They convert base salaries into signing bonuses. They spread those signing bonuses over the course of 5 years. That kicks the can down the road and then helps them save money right away in the current year. And that's fine. And they're completely content doing that year to year to year, borrowing from next year's salary cap. We see that all the time. So when they do something that's dramatically different from that, your ears are going to perk up, and rightfully so, right? So does the move tell you that Marshon Lattimore is likely to be traded? I wouldn't say that, because no matter what, like if you trade Marshon Lattimore, you're still taking on tons of salary cap space. Like you're still taking on tons of dead cap. It doesn't affect the dead cap that's already on the books for New Orleans. Now, if you trade him before that bonus sets in, that is guaranteed money that gets added, right? That you could avoid adding to the dead cap situation. So if you're so convinced that it's time to move on from Marshon Lattimore as an organization, you're probably going to do it before that bonus kicks in. But you have so much time until that bonus kicks in. And if you look at the past couple of years, we've seen over and over again that the Saints have not been afraid to shed away defensive backs in a surprising manner during training camps and things like that. We saw the trade of CJ Gardner-Johnson. We saw the release of Bradley Roby that people weren't expecting, all of that. Like we've seen that over the course of the past couple of years. Is Marshon Lattimore now next in line to be either dealt or moved on from? I imagine that it would be dealt. Right now, people are drawing a line of correlation between the Saints and Marshon Lattimore to the Miami Dolphins and Xavier Howard, who they tried, the Dolphins tried to find a trade partner for, couldn't find one. And so now they're expected to just move on from him to save that salary cap space. This is not the same thing. That is what actual cap hell looks like. What the New Orleans Saints have done, which is self-manufactured and managed years in advance, is a little bit more strategic than having to make desperation cuts to your roster. So instead, what the Saints are doing is that they don't have to make any decision on Marshon Lattimore when it comes to their salary cap here in 2024. Now, they can make a decision to trade him based on future cap considerations based upon that roster bonus that could set in a week before the season begins. But It's not the same thing. And the Saints are not in a situation to where they need to move away from Marshon Lattimore, or they need to cut or trade Marshon Lattimore, which was very much the feeling of everything that was going on with the Miami Dolphins. So there was recently a post that came up and said a lot of people are watching out for Xavier Howard and where he might land next. But if Marshon Lattimore, if the Saints can't find a trade partner for him, they'll have to cut him. That's not true. Like, what happened with Xavier Howard does not have to happen with Marshon Lattimore. The New Orleans Saints could very easily just keep Marshon Lattimore on the roster, let that roster bonus kick in, or restructure it ahead of time if they're able to. There's a certain amount of time between, like, there's usually provisions between, like, if you make an adjustment to somebody's contract, then there's a 12-month period before you can make contracts again, or some kind of a gap of time before you can make any further adjustments. But that's not always the case. We've seen that before. Michael Thomas had this effectively happen to his contract where they pushed some stuff down the way, but then they gave him a new contract like a month later, 2 months, or no, not a month later, but less than a half a year later. It was before the Week 18 game last year when they made the first adjustment, and then they ended up making another adjustment as free agency, was nearing. So it was at most 4 or 5 months, 3-4 months at that point. So not even 1.5, 2 months. I'm having trouble with my brain calendar today. But yeah, it was like 1.5, 2 months. So it doesn't signify that all is said and done with Marshon Lattimore, and things don't feel as solidly inevitable as things do with Michael Thomas, for instance. So if anybody tells you that the Saints have to move on from Marshon Lattimore, it's just a manner of finding a trade partner or cutting him, that is absolutely incorrect. The Saints can keep Marshon Lattimore. And as I've said on this show many, many times, even as we were doing the post-Marshon Lattimore trade mock draft yesterday, I don't think that the Saints should move on from Marshon Lattimore. I think that he's a guy that has done a lot for your organization and everything. And I get that sometimes, like, it's easy to romanticize the value of players that have previously performed well, but Marshon has never hasn't not performed well as of late. Like, there's not an example of him falling off a cliff at all. There's the injuries, but again, getting rolled up on and getting a lacerated kidney are not injury-prone injury problems. That's not the same conversation, right? And so I don't see the value in moving off of Marshon Lattimore. And instead, I could see the value in keeping Marshon Lattimore and continuing your secondary, right? Especially when you've got Dennis Allen, when you've got Joe Woods, when you've got Marcus Robertson, like, your defensive identity is effectively built around the culture of your secondary right now, because you don't have the pass rush, you don't have the run defense. But the one thing that you do have were 18 interceptions in 2023, and a really, really good secondary that again kept points off the board and allowed you to be a top 10 defense in the NFL. Like, that's what you have in that secondary. That is your entire bloodline, your DNA, your identity on the defensive side. I think if you're making any changes there, it's probably Marcus May. But I don't think that you're making the Marshon Lattimore trade, or not that they're not making it, but I don't think that they should. They might. And again, like I said, the rumors are going to heat up. Combine, a lot of people sharing information, all that other stuff, getting closer to free agency. Like, all these rumors are just going to pick up and up and up and up and up. But I will say that we don't know as solidly in terms of an inevitability or in terms of a solid assumption with Marshon Lattimore's future as we know with Michael Thomas's future. But those are all the things that factor into that. Coming up next, let's take a look at where the New Orleans Saints sit with their 2025 salary. We're going to take a look at the restructure of Carl Granderson's deal and the addition of a new front office member just through the NFL draft. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And now you can get buckets when you place your first bet over at FanDuel, Locked On's official sports betting partner. Because right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets by simply winning any $5 bet. Any $5 bet that you put down, if you win that thing, you get $150. So you can go and find a heavy favorite. Go with the biggest overdog, right? The biggest favorite that you can find in any line, any sport, anything that you find over at FanDuel, and immediately get 30-1 odds on it, which is pretty cool. So go and check them out today. That's $150 if your $5 bet wins. And you can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams. They've also got a bunch of cool stuff with the NFL draft as well. They've got quick bets. They've got live in-game parlays. They've got exclusive props and much more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation? The New Orleans Saints are already over the 2025 salary cap. No, we're going to be breaking it all down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much for being here, making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 national sports YouTube stream, the first of its kind over on YouTube. So you can be a part of history by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube today to check out that national sports 24/7 stream, the first of its kind over on YouTube. So look, the New Orleans Saints are doing all their salary cap moves and things like that. They had previously already redone contracts like Jameis Williams. They redid Marshon Lattimore's contract. They redid Michael Thomas's contract all before the offseason even got here. Since the offseason has gotten here, they, found out that they actually had like $13 million more than anybody projected when it came to the salary cap, in that it was like $255 million and we were projecting somewhere around 242. We've also seen them restructure the contracts of Eric McCoy, of Nathan Shepard, of Derek Carr. There's an expected restructure on the way for Cesar Ruiz, which would save another $6.5 million. And yesterday, the Saints went a little bit further, and they've restructured now Carl Granderson's deal, which was like the easiest restructure in the world with already guaranteed money. It just changes the accounting. It literally has no real impact. And so, except for the fact that it frees up the Saints $7.2 million. So now the Saints, between those moves, right, were $70 million to start on February 1st, basically, or let's say when the salary cap was announced, they were about $70 million over. And since they've cleared right around $30 million. So puts them in really good place to continue and be good by the time that everything gets rolling here in a couple of weeks. So you're going to see things like restructures to Cesar Ruiz, as we expect, to Alvin Kamara potentially. You're going to see things like potential pay cuts for guys like Taysom Hill and all that. And when I say pay cut for Taysom Hill, I don't mean that they literally just take money away from him. They approach him and they say, "Hey, are you willing to help?" And if he's willing to help, then you make the pay cut. If he's not willing to help, then you restructure him or you move on. Like, they'll figure out exactly how they're going to go about it. But it's not just like a, "Hey, we have leverage." It's not really a leverage thing. It's a, "Hey, will you help us out?" kind of a thing. And if he doesn't, then they make a new decision based on that. So what you're able to look at then is, where are the Saints when it comes to the salary cap? So they've got about $30 million left to chop off. They'll be fine. And they'll be able to spend, they had, that extra $13 million of the salary cap helped them a ton going into this as well. Now, one of the things that you'll see is a lot of people that are coming out and saying, "Hey, here's a report," or writing things about, what the Saints 2025 salary cap looks like. The 2025 salary cap right now, the Saints are like nearly $50 million over the salary cap already. And I'm here to tell you, we don't care. Nobody cares. It's fine. Like, the thing that has always so interested me, and this is the difference between people who cover the team and people who don't cover the team, who cover the NFL and are looking at it from like this very, very bird's eye perspective, this very, very far away perspective. They don't get the advantage that we get of like actually talking to people who make these decisions, why they're making the decision, all that. Like, Kai Harley explained exactly the way that the Saints manage their salary cap on local TV during training camp last year. And somehow people in the NFL sphere still don't understand how the Saints manage their salary cap. He explained everything, how they look at the salary cap as a multi-year amount, not as a one-year amount, how they use gap principles to manage things, and how they utilize things that are foundational to accounting and financial management across the board in the industry of accounting and financial management for their accounting and financial management. Like, all of it makes sense. And so you're seeing these stories come out that are like, "Hey, the Saints are $50 million over the salary cap," as if they don't know that, as if they didn't plan for that already. Like, that's the thing that's so hard to try to get people who are sort of the salary cap truthers and the salary cap naysayers. It's hard to get them to understand that the Saints have a plan for 5-6 years from now. It's not just, it's like people have always treated the Saints salary cap like they wake up on March 12th of 2024 and go, we're how far over the salary cap, and then have to rush and figure out how to get under the salary cap as if they don't know and as if it wasn't part of the plan. And people kind of assume and kind of treat it as if the Saints restructuring these contracts right now of Eric McCoy, of Derek Carr, of Nathan Shepard, of Carl Granderson, that they don't realize that they're adding money in future years. Of course they realize that they're adding money in future years. It's the point of a restructure. You're taking money from now, you're turning it into money that you pay off over the course of equal increment payments later on. As you continue to add money that you're spending later on, you then get less money against the cap to spend until eventually you're investing more money than what the salary cap actually allows. And then what the Saints do is that when they're, 20, 30, when they're 40, $50 million over the salary cap, or let me actually say that more appropriately, when they're 80, $90 million over the salary cap for 2025, they're $20, $30 million under the salary cap in 2024. Then they get to 2025, and then they go $70 million over the salary cap in 2026, and go $20, $30 million under the salary cap in 2025. Then 2026 comes, and in 2027, they put themselves $70, $80 million over the salary cap. And in 2026, they get $20, $30 million under the salary cap. So every year they get $30 million to spend based upon their ability to and their willingness to move money into a future year that isn't here yet. And all of that becomes more complicated as players that have those restructure amounts in their tenure in New Orleans. And so that's why the post-June 1 designation being written into Michael Thomas's contract is such a key thing, because that defers money to the following year in terms of, or like an extra year down the road in terms of what that dead cap looks like and when that dead cap hits and has an impact and all those other things. So you have to be ready for that, but there's a plan for that. So it's not that the Saints are $50 million over the salary cap in 2025 that should be the concern for people. If you want to be concerned about anything, it's what happens when the aging veterans are no longer aging veterans and instead they're not in the NFL anymore. And all of that money accelerates to you having to pay it off one way or another right away. And really the answer to that is reduce the salary on their retirement year, designate their retirement as a post-June 1 transaction, as a post-June 1 retirement, and then the money defers into future years. So there's ways to even manage that as well. So yes, you're going to see a bunch of stories about all that, but I wouldn't be too worried about it at this time. The last thing that I wanted to cover today was taking a look at the addition of Dave Ziegler as effectively in an advisory role. So Ziegler used to be the general manager of the Las Vegas Raiders in 2022, 2023. He worked as a director of player personnel the year before that. He was with the Denver Broncos before that, doing everything from pro personnel to player personnel, all these other things. So he's a guy with 3 championship rings that's been in a bunch of organizations and things like that have done some things, has some overlap with Dennis Allen. They were in Denver at the same time, for instance, and things like that. And he comes in on an advisory role. And I shared out his 2 draft classes with the Las Vegas Raiders, which were far from impressive. One of which, though, we're still waiting to figure out, right? One of them was just last year, so we don't actually know. It might turn out to be very impressive. We just have no idea yet. And then, free agency additions and moves and things like that, which are actually pretty solid. And it's another mind. It's another outside mind coming in, especially after they lost Rager earlier on, who went to one of their scouting guys that went to Denver earlier on this season. You get another piece of insight, you get another outside viewpoint that's coming in and assisting you throughout free agency and the draft. He's not a decision maker. He's just an advisory role guy, and everything that's coming in to kind of give you an extra insight, give you an extra point of view. It's a good move. It's a fine move. Get as many perspectives as possible, because you're trying to do new things. You're trying to do things differently. And so if you're trying to do new things differently and you're not bringing in new perspectives to help you do that, you ain't doing things differently. So for me, what this shows is that the Saints are bringing in a different perspective, which continues to further improve their intent of doing something different in 2024. And that I'm all on board for. All right. We'll see y'all tomorrow. I appreciate you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Make sure you go and check out Locked On LSU, the LSU women's basketball team on a roll again. Haley Van Lith looked fantastic the other night. 20 plus points, 4 threes in clutch situations, all that as they toppled Tennessee. So make sure you go and check out Locked On LSU. and of course, Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans as well. Appreciate you as always, making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.